Hello, and welcome to the AskEzra podcast, real people with intimacy challenges and real intimacy coaching. I'm Sir Ezra Algos, intimacy coach at AskEzra.info. If this is your first episode, you might be asking yourself, what is intimacy coaching? One definition is that an intimacy coach helps people feel safer, closer, and more connected to their lovers, friends, and even themselves. It is my goal to help people become closer to the people that they care about. So join me for this session already in progress. So in terms of the challenges that we have sought to address in our work together, what do you think has been the most affected by our work?
The challenge is for me to see my own behavior.
Yeah.
And to see what I'm doing in relationships that I'm either ignoring something or I'm pushing something. And so that's been my biggest challenge, is to just see what I'm really doing. And I think you've given me an ability to kind of vet myself in terms of what am I doing and how am I approaching things. Because rather than just make assumptions, I've learned how to actually approach and have a conversation with people. So like that one relationship where I'm kind of pursuing it, you helped me step through getting more vulnerable in my conversations about wanting to have sex with somebody, but not wanting to say I want to have sex with somebody, just trying to dance around the topic. Whereas with you, I've learned how to actually approach that in a way that is non-confrontationally confrontational, or non-offensively confrontational, I guess is a better way of putting that.
Sure.
So it's like, I'm now actually able to state my desires in a way that I haven't been able to previously.
Yeah. Well, and that's being vulnerable, right? That's saying, hey, here's what I want, here's what I need is a very vulnerable place. One of my favorite questions to ask is like, how do you feel about sex in general? Right. Like when you're dating somebody, because some people find like it's not a huge deal. Some people think it's a really big deal. Some people think it's, really desirable. Other people think it's not so desirable. Other people are somewhere in the middle, and if you don't have those pieces of information, then it's really easy to take those things personally. Right. Yeah. Like if you're dating somebody and they say, I'm ideally having sex once a year, then that's going to take a huge load off of you if you think that they're not interested in sex because of something you've done.
Right. And I think that we as a society don't have an easy time talking about sex to begin with. We like to just make assumptions about what the other person wants and needs, and we think we know. And I hear that all the time. And it's a load of bullshit in reality. Yeah.
Yeah. And we're also like left up to this really bizarre dance of like assumptions, right? Like if their behavior doesn't match my assumptions, then something's wrong and I'm just going to pull the ripcord, right? Totally. Like the one that gets me is, okay, you've had a date. What is your next contact? Who's calling who, when? Right. And is one person like waiting for that call to mystically happen 2 days later? Are they offended if it happens 2 days later and they expected it the same night? Like what are you expecting? And so like BDSM has given me the freedom to really be communicative about what I'm going to do and to check in and to make sure that that matches with what they'd like me to do. Right. So I say, hey, I had a great time tonight. I'd like to call you tomorrow and figure out when we can see each other again.
Yeah.
And they can say, oh, well, okay, well, I was expecting you to call me in 3 days. Okay, go, I'll do that.
Just such a silly role, but whatever.
It is. It really is. It's very silly that we should expect to just mystically know what the other person's expecting of us. The other thing that's really silly is like, do they like the same music as me? They do? Great, we're fucking. Like, what? Right. Like, that has nothing to do with who they are as a person, right?
Exactly. The emphasis that you put on and that the community puts on of consent and setting boundaries and being clear, whether or not I'm actually in an actual like BDSM relationship with somebody isn't really the issue anymore. It's like that skill set now transfers over to a non-BDSM relationship.
Absolutely.
Vanilla dating relationship, it's still going to be the same. I would apply the same rules and probably being far more successful in that relationship as a result.
Yeah, yeah. And it's definitely the case. And I mean, it impacts everything. Like the way that I negotiate at work is different. The way that I, talk to my parents is different. Because I'm able to set boundaries really clearly and to say, hey, for me, I'm going to be uncomfortable unless we can operate within this container.
Right.
And I would hope that you can respect that container. And if you can't, then this is how I'm going to react in order to protect myself, in order to, so that I can keep showing up. Right. And it's not, you're terrible if you can't do this for me. Right. It's just, hey, this is what I need. If you can't do this, then this is how this is going to affect me in this situation.
Right. And I think that so often we go to that knee-jerk reaction of you're terrible, you're not filling my needs. And I'm telling a story immediately about what you're thinking and how you're acting and why you're acting. And it's usually wrong. Didn't talk to my friend for a couple of days, and immediately my head starts creating a story as to what's going on and why. And like the fiction machine in my head is truly, if I could just get it to like print out scripts, it'd be so much better. I wouldn't have to actually type anything. But today we ended up talking, and it turns out that it's nothing that I had thought was ever actually going on was actually going on. It's like busy with their own life, because that happens. But it would have been very easy for me to just be like, fuck that, I'm out of here. Not even going to talk to him anymore. I'm done. Because that's just a natural reaction.
Yeah, because you feel abandoned. Hey everybody, it's Ezra. And wow, isn't that exciting? Wouldn't you like to be the next guest on our show? Well, you can. Just email AskEzra8@gmail.com. And hey, if being on the show is too much and you'd just like to get some private intimacy coaching, that's available too. Now back to our show.
But I've learned, like having gone through some of this stuff, like having to do the intimacy quiz thing to realize like, oh, okay, so I have some avoidance issues and I have a little bit of a weird attachment thing. It's like, oh, okay, there's some abandonment issues.
You did your homework.
I did that homework. Yes, I have done that homework. I haven't done the other 22-page inventory homework.
That admittedly is a big assignment.
I printed it out. I thought, okay, because the email came through with the PDF, and I'm like, I'll just hit print. And it's printing and printing and printing. I'm like, good Lord. It's 22 pages.
It's 22 pages. It's 590 items. There are a few redundancies, not a lot, but there's a few. And one of the things I like to do, I'm going to let the cat out of the bag maybe I'll suffer this because it's a trick kind of, but like when I'm dating is I like to give this to somebody and say, okay, fill it out. And then I want to see how they react to this like preposterously long task. Right. I've had it handed to me. I think, okay, I've had like maybe 20 of these surveys filled out for me, right, in the last 8 years. I've had somebody give it to me laminated in a binder. I've had somebody fill it out after I mentioned it and not after I asked them to do it. Interestingly enough, that showed itself to be a problematic behavior in the relationship because they were putting rules on themselves that were not asked of them. I've had somebody bargain with me, say, well, okay, I'll do it, but you have to hang out with me while I do it. Right. I've had people do like a terrible job of just like skipping whole sections. Right. I've had people like try to negotiate, like, do I really need to do this? Is this like a trick? I'm like, no, I'd like to know. I've had people be very upset with me that I haven't had the same ready for them in response.
Oh,
Right.
really? What's that about?
Well, I mean, I'm a dom, right? I may demand a vulnerability I'm not interested in reciprocating, right?
Oh, okay.
Turnabout is not fair play. If somebody says to me, I'll fill this out if I can get yours, well, there you go. That's, that's negotiation. But
Right.
just to assume that I have this ready for them, no.
So have you filled it out?
Yeah, of course I filled it out. I filled it
All
out.
right.
I
Checking.
filled it out with my like Dom headspace. And then I
Yeah.
also did my best to like fill it out from like a bottom headspace.
Mhm.
Right. Because I'm not really interested in submission, but I do occasionally on Blue Moon bottom.
Yeah.
And so, that's a useful tool for me to have a conversation with somebody who is interested in topping me and say, okay, like these are the things that I'm willing to do.
Right.
And I think what makes it really valuable from like an actual dating perspective is you get to ask questions without having to focus on the question. Right. Like, okay, let's say I'm interested in feet and I'm embarrassed about that. Right. It's on the survey. I can bring it up on this. I can look at the survey.
Right.
And if, your interest level in sucking toes is a 0 out of 5, then I'm not going to bring it up.
Yeah.
And our quality of interaction is going to be better because you don't have like, maybe that person is fatigued by saying no. There are some people who have like a really strong resistance to saying no.
Right.
And so the more times you ask them to say no, the worse time they're going to have.
Yeah.
And so they said no on the paper. It didn't feel like anything to them, but I don't have to be like, hey, I really like sucking toes. How about you? And they're like, no.
Right.
Right. I don't have to have that conversation. But you have to watch that because that could be avoiding vulnerability.
For sure.
Selective vulnerability.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see.
Yeah. So I don't know when I'm going to get to the 599 million question survey thing. It's like, okay, is this I'm going to order a pizza and like lock myself in a bedroom for a weekend or?
Yeah. When people are having challenges with it, what I suggest is set aside an hour and just do as much as you can in that hour and then put it down.
Yeah.
Because if you try to just hammer through it, it's gonna be terrible. You're not gonna
too overwhelming.
Yeah. You're gonna be all attention in the A's and no attention in the Z, X, Y, Z, right? You're gonna be just striking down the page.
Yeah.
I wrote something. But it's really interesting.
It's interesting because I'm flipping it, I'm turning it, I'm using it like in my head. I'm like, okay, so now I want to put this on somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Do I want to give them all 599 million questions, or am I going to like feed this to them like a page at a time?
Well, that'd be a long process. What I might suggest was to go through it and like highlight or select the things that you are compelled to be interested in, and then separate that out. And now you can have a 50 page or a 50 item list,
right,
that you're interested in instead of a 500. And then you can say, okay, well, what of these things is interesting to you?
right.
So
here's my menu of choice, and start from there.
Yeah. And what I love about it too is it's not binary. It's not like, are you interested? Aren't you interested? Right. It's
right.
Rate your interest level. The questions are, have you done this before? Rate your interest level 0 through 5. And like, how interested are you in this? Not at all, have to be forced, a little bit, sometimes, often, every time, right? Fetish need, for example. Hey, everybody, it's Ezra. Do some of these challenges sound like some of the things you've been dealing with? Maybe your challenges are very different, but you just love to have somebody to work on them with. Well, you're not alone on your journey. I'm here to help. So email AskEzra8@gmail.com or visit us at AskEzra.info, and maybe we can set up a session where we just focus on you. All right, back to the last component of our show. I had a partner who had some challenges around like toxic independence, right?
Toxic independence.
Yeah, to toxic independence is when somebody's like, I don't need anybody for anything, right? And that's not really true. Like, we're humans, we need people.
Right.
Nobody's gonna like mill their own wheat, right? You need people to you need people. And
People.
emotionally we need people, right?
We need people. Yeah.
Right. Emotionally we need people. And if you're going to pretend that you don't, then that's a toxic trait.
Well, it's a trauma response, clearly.
It is.
I mean, that's clearly like, okay, I don't know who hurt you, but somebody did really bad.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Your close nuclear family.
Yeah. Dad.
So yeah, but and so for me, that would be like a huge, probably red flag.
Yeah. Well, and it's, on the topic of red flags, I think that it's valuable to sort of study what some people consider red flags, and it's valuable to have your own list, but it's also important to realize that like there's no such thing as an objective red flag. Like, if I have schizophrenia and my partner has schizophrenia, that's like not necessarily a red flag for me. But if I'm anxious, or if I have like no capacity to deal with somebody who has schizophrenia, that's a red flag for me, right? They're subjective. And I think especially the younger members of the community can think of red flags as like objective things that are like, for sure, never be with a person who is insecure. It's like, sorry, honey, like, we're all insecure.
And I think honestly, that's one of the other big lessons that I've learned from you, is that there's so much variety. For years I've said sexuality, like human sexuality, is a 7-lane highway, and most people are in the bike lane, and that's pretty true in my experience. But like with you, it's sort of like you've expanded that even further for me, in that like everything is kind of negotiable and everything is sort of acceptable. It's just a question of, what do you want? Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's ethics and morality in there, but those are cultural, right? Those are cultural and situational. And I think even, I'm an advocate for, radical sexual acceptance. And I would say that even when your sexual impulses are unethical, like even when the fulfillment of your sexual impulse is something that would hurt somebody or involve somebody who can't consent, or an animal, right? The impulse isn't bad, and we can still find ways to like role play it in a way that is harm reduced and isn't unethical. It doesn't impact somebody else negatively. And I think accepting that sexuality is the first step to moving in an ethical way in the world. Thanks for watching the Ask Ezra podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with your friends on social media. If you would like to review this episode, please do so at Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to support the episode, go to patreon.com/AskEzra, and you can sign up for our mailing list at AskEzra8@gmail.com. Lastly, if you'd like to find out if intimacy coaching is right for you, visit AskEzra.info. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to tune in next time.